Hello, everyone. I'm Carolyn Fowler from the Office of Wellbeing, and we're here today for another conversation in our Supporting Our Colleagues series. And today with me, I have Karen Swartz from the Department of Psychiatry. Hello, Karen. And Matt Norvell, who's a pediatric chaplain and a founding member of the RISE teams. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
And the topic we're here to discuss is how do we speak to our colleagues about personal loss and grief? So before we talk about how to speak about personal loss and grief, Karen, are there any important things we need to understand about the experience of grief and loss?
I think one thing to remember is that this is a universal experience. It's something we all go through, and those of us in healthcare certainly go through it commonly. It's not uncommon to lose a patient, especially if you're in a subspecialty where there is a lot of loss. But then we're doing that as a team. We're able to compartmentalize, we're able to think about losing a patient. It's something we expected, that's very different. And we have our whole team to support each other. What's very different is if you're losing someone that's close to you, someone who's a friend, who's a colleague, and that ends up being different. But there's certain things about grief that happen no matter what the loss. One thing is that it takes longer to get over than you expect. Another is that it's very intense at the beginning, but then tends to come in waves, and that people will feel like, oh gosh, I think I'm doing okay. But then they're not, because they're actually having something remind them of the loss, and they might have an intensity of those feelings come back. And it's just going to take time.
So Matt, why is it that some deaths just are so much harder than others?
Well, there's a lot of variables that feed into how a person experiences a loss. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a death is obviously a really impactful type of loss that we might run into. And so, as Karen was talking about, if we experience a death in the course of our professional work, a patient dies, we might work in a unit where patients die with some regularity. And so it's not unusual. Maybe we don't know them. We don't know their family. Maybe we only knew a little bit about them. And so we don't have as much of a personal connection. And then when we compare that to the loss of a spouse or the death of a sibling, the death of an uncle, a family member, a beloved neighbor, maybe somebody that we work with, that we're friends with, we can think about how that longer term relationship, the deeper the personal connection, that amplifies the experience that we have of what it means to have them not in our lives. And so there's these variables can be, maybe it's how the family system was set up. Is it a really close connection, or is it not a close connection? You might have known a family where there were two children and the mother of the family died. One child would be devastated and the other sibling was not so devastated because they had a different type of relationship with their mother. We might have a colleague die on our unit, and one person might be just has to take time off because they are so broken up about the death of this colleague. And someone else who maybe knew them the same amount of time is not so impacted. And that impact varies. Some of it is personal coping skills. Some of it is the way that they're connected. Some of it is the type of relationship it was. Mm-hmm. And so all of these things to say, we can't make any assumptions about how a loss is going to affect a family, how it's going to affect a system, how it's going to affect an entire nursing unit when a death occurs.
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of variation of experience, and that could maybe be challenging if we want to talk to our colleagues when we know there is so much variation potentially. Karen, in the midst of all that variation, are there some common themes that it would help us to understand?
I think there are. One thing is that, with a loss, we're all going to have a period of grief. And so I think acknowledging that and being able to say, what was different? What kind of loss is this for me? Again, as I said before, it takes time. It takes a lot more time than people think it's going to take. And so they often get They get impatient with themselves. I should be feeling better. I should be over this already. And I think that's really a problem. The other thing is that when most people, say you're the one person that had the closest relationship, everyone else around you might be farther along in the grieving process. But as Matt had said, if something is unexpected versus expected, how close the relationship, all of those things matter about whether you're the person that is still intensely sad and is having a lot of those negative thoughts and just feeling this incapacity to really enjoy other things and have as many positive emotions.
Well, let me just ask you then quickly before we get to Matt. At what point should we be concerned that the grief is becoming overwhelming?
It's a tricky thing to decide, is someone grieving or has this actually triggered something more serious, something like depression or serious anxiety. And one thing that's tricky is that initially a lot of the symptoms overlap, in that when people are initially grieving, they might have changes in their sleep, their ability to enjoy things, their ability to feel positive emotions. What's different about depression, and when it's something that needs a different kind of treatment or a different kind of attention, is when those feelings are no longer coming in waves, but you have continuous low mood, where you have continuous anxiety, where your capacity to enjoy things. I mean, anyone that has been to a funeral knows that even the most grief-stricken person can hear a great story about the person they loved and brighten up and enjoy that and have moments of happiness interspersed with these periods of feeling really sad. With depression, it's a much more continuous kind of low mood, or with anxiety, continuous sort of stress and concern in that way. The other thing is that usually with grief, people don't lose their sense of confidence. Their feelings about themselves don't change. They might have regrets. They might wish they had done things differently or they had spent more time. But that core part of depression, which is really feeling that you're not a good person, you screwed up, you're not contributing, that is not typical for grief. And so when people have ongoing symptoms that really never lighten up, when they start becoming much more self-critical, or importantly, if they're having thoughts about suicide, thinking about your own death in that way, or thinking your life's not worth living, is not a typical part of grief. So those kinds of changes would be a time that someone should think about seeking their own support and help.
And if we see a colleague really struggling, to maybe offer to connect them, or?
Absolutely. I think that for all of us in this time, taking time to reach out, having a chance, if you notice someone is having trouble functioning, if they just seem not to be able to shake it, if they seem to continuously be distressed, one of the kindest things you could do is reach out and suggest that perhaps they take advantage of some of the supports that are available here so that they get the help that they need.
Thank you. So Matt, you've spent a lot of time with people who are grieving and with families at a time of loss. Could you tell us how we should talk to our colleagues about loss and grief?
Yeah, a lot of times people avoid talking to a person who is bereaved, a person who has experienced a really significant loss. And there's, it's a little bit of worry, like, man, what if I bring it up and I make them sadder? What if I bring it up and it makes them feel worse? And most of the time, if somebody has experienced a really significant loss, they have lost anything from like a beloved pet to a parent to a spouse. When someone asks about how are you feeling since the death of whatever, it often is a comfort. It's often an opportunity to be able to talk about the person who has died. It's almost a gift when we think about we're intentionally gonna have this conversation. And I think that that's one of the most important things, is being willing to intentionally show that care and concern and ask. When we can show up and be with another person who is hurting, because remember, they've experienced loss. If we're assuming, as Karen just said, that they're not seriously depressed, don't have a sort of diagnosable anxiety, that they're not thinking about hurting themselves, what they're doing is they're grieving, and everybody is grieving something most of the time. And so when we can intentionally show up, make that effort and say, can you tell me how you're doing? And then maybe even ask, is there a particular thing that you miss most about this person? Right? Just being willing to be curious about their experience is such a gift to a person. And that's a piece of whether you're a manager trying to have these kind of conversations or you're a colleague trying to have these conversations, the intentionality is so important. You know, often it just kind of gets brushed off with, I heard your friend died. You doing okay? Right? Like, and we just do that in the middle of rounds and keep going. But being able to take that chance and really invite a person to talk is really important. And if you can show up and really open yourself to listening to their experience, as opposed to bringing your own assumptions about how they're feeling, that's going to make a big difference. And if you don't have some really good phrases to use in those, just being able to say, sounds like they were really important to you. Can you tell me more about it? Or saying, what else would you want somebody to know about this person if you were telling them about them for the first time, right? Trying to be asking open-ended questions, not questions that someone can just answer with a yes or no or next Tuesday, right? And so being able to give them a chance to talk about their experience at their pace and tell the details that they want to tell, as opposed to you asking very specific, tell me what's going on. I think that those are some really useful things that are going to open up conversation and give a person a chance to express their feelings, as opposed to checking a box of, yes, I asked them how they were doing and they said fine.
Matt, I've heard several people say that when a death is sudden, so for example, we didn't know a colleague was ill because they're very private and now suddenly they're gone, or somebody has fallen asleep and been in a car crash and died. We've heard stories of this where there's a lot of second guessing and a lot of sense of guilt. Like, we wish we'd known and we could have been nicer to them. We might not have had that fight with them that we had with them last week, or, we might have been a little kinder to them, or not swapped a shift with them, or whatever it is. And there's so much time of people trying to make sense of something that maybe they can never make sense of. What would you suggest in those circumstances that we do?
Well, unfortunately, I just affirm for people that you can't make sense out of these things. There's some stuff that we're not ever going to understand. There will be feelings of guilt because the last time you talked to them, you had a fight with them. And acknowledging that you feel bad about that. And being able to acknowledge that we can't undo that. And so figuring out, it's almost like a legacy building or memory making. Being able to say that is a part of the relationship that happened, but it doesn't define the whole relationship. And how am I going to remember this person going forward? How am I going to tell their story? And maybe it was a really significant thing. Maybe it was a really significant fight. But being able to say, I'm going to be different now in how I treat people going forward, because I'm really well acquainted with how fragile relationships can be. And so, because where people can get stuck is they just keep replaying the negative and they wish that they could go back and undo it. And in whatever gentle way that we can, helping people come to terms with the fact that they're not going to be able to undo what's happened, but what they have control over is what they're going to do going forward.
Maybe one last question, and that is, are people on a different timeline for when they're ready to talk about this? Maybe because I feel ready to talk about it, could it be that maybe my colleagues are not ready to talk about it yet? Karen, do you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I think that's one of the most important things to recognize. You can't script how you grieve. You can't impose the way you're grieving on anyone else. Everyone needs different things. Everyone will benefit from different things. Even in families, it's hard when two siblings maybe aren't grieving the same way. And so I think we just need to be respectful. And as Matt has said, so thoughtfully, we need to ask people what they need. And so if we're trying to support a colleague, seeing what they need, there are times that people will say, right now is not a great time to talk about it. So you could say, well, tell me when you'd like to, or come back to them, because it might just be a day that they can't have one more conversation about it. But another thing, just timing wise, I think too often we get caught up in supporting someone when they first have a loss and forget that this process could go on for a year or more than a year if it's a really sudden, unexpected, and painful loss. So we need to be there for people for a while. And so asking, just as Matt described, in 2 months, in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year, those are, I think, really important things to include in supporting someone.
Mm-hmm. Especially when we get to the anniversary, perhaps.
Absolutely. For holidays, first birthdays, all of those sort of landmarks and benchmarks are really, they're painful because, oh my gosh, it's my first Christmas without my husband. It's his birthday. I mean, those things for years are still very painful for people, and extra support at those times is really welcome usually.
Well, thank you both so much. We're going to have a tip sheet on this for you to download if you want to think more about having conversations, but I'm going to go one more time to Matt. Matt, as somebody who spent so many years standing by people during times of grief and loss, is there one takeaway you'd like to leave us with?
I think the thing that I encourage myself to remember, and I encourage others to remember, is that we do have to be as gentle as we can with ourselves and with each other, because we all carry grief. We all experience losses. Every one of us is human. Every one of us is in relationship with other people. And what one of our hard realities is that people die. Mm-hmm. And we're all going to respond to that in a different way. So hopefully we can all be as gentle as possible with ourselves and each other as we try to be in relationship.
Thank you, Matt, so much. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, every one of you who's watching this, for your commitment and caring, both for your colleagues and for yourself. Thank you for joining us.